Welcome to the Property Management Law Solutions Podcast. Your host, Attorney Tim Baldwin, will guide you in all things property management, law, markets, politics, and commentary. Your property is his priority. Here's your host, Attorney Tim Baldwin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Property Management Law Solutions Podcast. I am your host, Attorney Tim Baldwin. And today we have one of my favorite people around, our special guest today, Austin Tenpenny. Hey, Austin.
Tim, how's it going, man? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I'm really, really happy that you joined the podcast today. Of course, Austin and I know each other, have known each other for a little while now. And Austin is one of these guys that he's just all around talented, all around knowledgeable, super smart, super ambitious, entrepreneurial. And I knew that Austin would make a great guest for the listeners today. And of course, Austin, as you know, a lot of our listeners are investors, property managers, and just, people who are interested in the real estate world. So let's jump into this, Austin. Hey, Austin, tell the folks a little bit about yourself before we kind of jump into our show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tim, thanks for having me on. Obviously, big fan of you, big fan of the podcast, and was excited to get on and talk shop. So yeah, name's Austin Tenpenny. I'm the CEO and managing partner of aDoor Properties. We are a real estate investment firm based in Pensacola, Florida. Our kind of investment strategy right now is investing in the build for rent and multifamily asset class. And then we also do a lot of land development, single family lot development, all kind of on the Gulf Coast. And I've been in the game now probably 15 years and kind of done it all. My background's construction. I was been a general contractor most of my adult life. At aDoor, we've built homes, we've built townhomes, we've developed land, kind of anything and everything under the sun related to residential real estate investing. We've kind of dabbled in it. So I was excited to get on and talk some about the build for rent stuff we've got going on and the challenges associated with it, and how it all ties together, how the circle of life of the investment life cycle all ties together.
Yeah, man. Well, people who are around the Pensacola area, of course, probably know about aDoor Properties. It's a pretty prominent company in our area. And of course, the land development, as you said, a lot of homes being built and land developed for other builders. And so I know that you've been an intricate part of that and a leader in that regard. So, you've made a name for yourself, you have a great reputation in this area. So you've done a great job, Austin. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the years and, seeing the great work that you do. I mean, you're a young guy, you're younger than I am, but man, it's just the things you've accomplished have been incredible. So so let's jump into this. So the build for rent world, of course, a lot of the listeners probably are familiar with this, but it's a fairly new phenomenon in that, you have these investors who are building single family home neighborhoods with the sole and expressed intent of leasing them out for a period of time and then eventually selling them, or maybe not, maybe holding them as a long-term investment. But that's something that you're heavily involved with now. So give the listeners a little bit of context of kind of how you think this market developed to where it is now, which is a huge market across the country.
Yeah, for sure. The build for an asset class is interesting because it's kind of always been around, like flying under the radar, but really within the last 4, 5, 6 years, it's really taken off. And a lot of that was driven by the single family, spec home sales, new construction home spec sales kind of taking a tank when interest rates went up, whenever the Fed raised rates a few years ago, and it kind of hurt the affordability. So you had a lot of new construction homes, a lot of builders out there with new construction homes that weren't selling. And so when they're not selling, you kind of package them up to investment groups and put tenants in them. And it was kind of just a way for the spec builders, they kind of shifted and started leasing these homes versus selling the specs. And then it got to where people realized it was a good investment. So then they really went after it. Purpose built single family rental communities started taking off, and so yeah, we've been hot and heavy in it now for I guess about 2 or 3 years, intentionally going after these communities. We acquired our first community in May of 2023. Just got it stabilized and went through a refinance, and it's a great asset class, but just like anything in current times, there's always nothing's easy. Nothing's easy in any of the stuff we do, and so we're kind of learning and overcoming some challenges, and yeah, it's wild out there, and that's how it all ties together with the leasing, and then obviously Tim, with what you do on the property management law stuff, it's been interesting to go through lease ups and see what happens when you let in unqualified tenants. Then
yeah,
I'm calling Tim saying, Tim, we made a mistake. I need to get this one out.
Well, how would you sort of compare the build for rent with the multifamily? Of course, aDoor's companies, manages some multifamily as well. And there's some similarities with build for rent, but do you see some distinctions with how you approach, let's just say, the portfolio, the projections of a build for rent community versus a multifamily property?
Oh yeah, for sure. The biggest and obvious thing with build for rent versus traditional multifamily is the rents in a build for rent community are always going to be a lot higher because you're getting a bigger space, you're getting a yard, you're getting a 2-car garage a lot of times with a fence, and so the rental rates are substantially higher than that of traditional multifamily, which is great. But it's a blessing and a curse because the lease up, when you're leasing these things up, we buy these brand new homes and you have to lease them up. The lease up takes substantially longer than that of traditional multifamily because your absorption rate is a lot slower because it's a more expensive rental product.
Yeah.
At least, and to be clear, I'm speaking for our market, Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not familiar with the market, but in the Gulf Coast, the absorption is a lot slower, and you just have to model that on the front end. I see a lot of people that get overly aggressive on their assumptions and, we'll get 15 a month. And a lot of those assumptions, people are associating traditional multifamily with build for rent, and they are not the same.
Yeah.
Completely different. So,
but do investors, do you find that the investors, though, when they look at a build for rent, they're kind of they have some expectations that you may have with a multifamily lease up?
So, some do, but it's all about, I just try to set expectations that, we model it on the front end. So we know out of the gates that, hey, this is going to be a slower lease up. And at the end of the day, from an investment standpoint, if you're getting to the returns and the investment metrics that you want, how you get from A to Z a lot of times doesn't necessarily matter. Where you get in hot water is when you assume you can go faster, and then those returns you thought you were going to hit quickly disappear when you miss your absorption rate. So, it's just like a financial chess match of moving numbers and pulling the levers you can pull to keep things on track.
Right. So of course you have market shifts, and with the market change that happened from 2000 and really from 2023 or 22 especially, but going into 23 and in 24, we started seeing a pretty big shift. The market was such back in 2022 where people were renting properties sight unseen. I mean, you couldn't keep them vacant. I mean, people just rented right away. And of course, the market here in this area, and of course, a lot of parts of the country too, started cooling off. So you have these, build for rent or even multifamily projects that, hit the market. And all of a sudden, the market's not quite as hot. And so you got to make these real quick adjustments on your plan of action. Did you see some of that as we went into 23 and 24?
Oh yeah. Yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head. We saw rents around here, during the COVID real estate era, rents appreciated around here drastically. I mean, like you said, you couldn't provide enough rental housing. And once the dust settled from that, we've now seen a big correction in rents, and rents are coming down in this area. And so we're seeing it in real time with our renewal rates and what people renew for. And Even leasing up new communities we've got right now, we're kind of seeing it. And I don't, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing long term for the asset class. I think people got wild and it appreciated, and valuations of this asset got out of control. I mean, there were some of these build for rent assets around the Pensacola MSA selling at 4 caps and 4.5 caps, which is just a crazy valuation that would have never, that'll never sustain. And so I think we're seeing a slight correction around here. And we're living it in real time. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that we keep an eye on.
Yeah.
When we're modeling new deals, especially.
Right.
If the market rent today is, call it 2,200, I'm plugging in that pro forma 1,950, to give us that wiggle for a potential decrease. That way, from an investment standpoint, our projections have a little cushion in them. If we're going through lease up, we don't get that 2,200, we can still drop and hit our margins we need to hit.
Well, to me, the irony of the build for rent phenomenon, as well as the multifamily boom. All right. I mean, there's so many multifamily units being built all across the Florida. I mean, as I travel around the state with, seminars and clientele and that kind of thing, I mean, they're just popping up everywhere. And of course, the build for rent communities are too. And so, of course, you have this influx of availability on the market, which, of course, means that, there's more options for renters and prices tend to go down. But what's interesting to me is that, the traditional property manager, so the management companies who are managing for third-party owners, and typically they're one-offs, they're single-family units, maybe a 4-plex, maybe an 8-plex. Those guys, I've heard them more than once, is that they're looking at the build for rent model, and they're looking at the multifamily units going up, and they're saying, man, it's really hard for us right now to kind of gauge expectations of vacancy rates and where the rental value is going to be. And so I kind of wonder if, from your perspective, though, do you think that the build for rent boom and the multifamily boom, are they sort of creating their own, I say dilemma, that's probably not the right word, but they're sort of creating the push down on the pricing because of the influx of market?
That's a great point. And actually, I just read an article from CoStar. I'll send you. You could put it in the show notes that basically talks about exactly that, where build for rent starts are actually down. They're projected to become down because multifamily starts were through the roof. And a lot of those, the new starts on build for rent are being triggered from these rents coming down because we had a big influx last year of build for rent units. So yeah, it's like this cycle. And it's all market specific, obviously, but 100%. That's exactly what's kind of happening in certain markets. Is you're kind of, especially, you end up kind of competing with yourself. With especially, I mean, at aDoor, we've got several assets that are close to each other, and then it's a big thing we look at when we're going to buy a new property is how many build for rent assets are in this MSA. Who are we going to be competing with?
Yeah.
But yeah, you hit it dead on. That's exactly kind of what's happening.
Well, do you find that government, counties and cities, government structures, entities are beginning to, I guess limit is the word I'm thinking of. They're starting to limit the amount of permits for this class because they're seeing the influx and they're not wanting to saturate the market like that. Are you seeing that yet?
No, and there's chatter about it in the industry, about local jurisdictions trying to put constraints on single family rental communities, but we have not seen it on the Gulf Coast yet, because really there's nothing that can, in the current zonings in the markets that we operate in, there's not a whole lot they can do to prevent you from doing it, because if the zoning meets the land development code, it's a fee simple lot. There's not a whole lot they can do. They can't tell a property owner you can't do that. Now, that's in the current situation. I think if it goes on, because outside of just, I don't think the local government is necessarily concerned about saturation. They're kind of more worried about the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people.
Yeah.
They don't want to live next door to a rental community.
Right.
There is a lot of chatter about that, about some of these local jurisdictions catching on to the zonings and catching on to like, oh wait, this is supposed to be a single family subdivision. not a single family rental subdivision.
Right.
But thankfully we haven't seen that yet in the markets we're operating in, but it is something that we kind of keep an eye out on. You definitely want to be developing these communities and in pro-development areas, which in this day and age is becoming harder and harder to come by.
Well, I've read some articles from some of the multifamily and build for rent resources that some of the larger urban areas, those government entities are limiting now. They're pushing down on the permits for multifamily. So, so there is somewhat of a trend in certain areas of the country. Would you think that comes to areas like Pensacola?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's always a possibility. It's always a risk. But when you look, you got to look at the economics of the area and the market you're operating in. And right now, Pensacola MSA for the build for rent asset class is not too saturated. And really, it's going to slow down naturally with what's going on right now in the economy and rents the rents coming down are going to kill a lot of deals, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the long-term health of this particular area with the build for rent asset class. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Well, between me and you, I hope not, buddy. They better not.
Well, it's interesting because there's such a discussion, politically and in the news that there's a housing shortage. And thus, obviously we need more housing for people. And so the fact that there's this, this trend among certain urban areas to reduce the amount of new apartments is interesting to me. And I suppose there's local politics that are going in with that, because I guess if you have a lot of investment groups and companies and notable people in those areas where you have a lot of money tied into these multifamily properties, and they're seeing, the new blood, so to speak, coming in to try to do the same thing. The value of that rental value goes down. And so there might be some opposition, from the people who may control politics in those areas.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. It's always going to be a big topic of conversation in the industry, that exact thing. The institutional landlord, as they like to refer to us, the ones that own more than 100, 200 doors. Yeah. Or actually, I think they classify it over 50 doors. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, they look at the institutional landlord as kind of a bad thing of groups that own that many housing and develop. But they don't like us, but they accept that giant property tax check we cut every year. They got no problems receiving that.
Yeah. Well, of course, I was in my mind, I was thinking that there's new regulations like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac have released new criteria for those investors who are getting loans from them on certain conditions that you have to comply with in your lease. Like, for an example, giving the tenants at least 30 days notice of a rent increase, or, I'm trying to think of the other conditions. There were several conditions that they're imposing for loans from them. So I'm not sure. Have you seen that at all from the types of loans that you guys are getting?
So not yet, but I have heard. So we just closed a big loan with Fannie Mae. We refinanced one of our build for rent assets last month and went through that whole process. It's our first time doing a deal with Fannie Mae. And as we were going through that process, they are getting more and more stringent on their requirements from the borrower, that the asset owner. And so we didn't experience it too hard with this last refinance, but they are putting out new guidelines. What you mentioned, plus just the operator themselves, how they underwrite build for rent, your debt ceiling coverage restraints they use, occupancy requirements, leasing. They drill really hard into military tenants and the percentage of military tenants, corporate housing tenants.
Wow.
Yeah, they get pretty granular on all that stuff.
So even with the military guys in Florida, you cannot discriminate against military tenants. And it's interesting that you mentioned that they're throwing in some kind of um, I'm not sure if they're restrictions or percentages or whatever, but that's interesting to me, especially as it relates to Florida law. So maybe we don't bog into that right now. Maybe it's too complex right now.
We could go a whole podcast on that, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I actually just found the article right now. Yeah, there's a 30-day notice requirement for rent increases, 30-day notice requirement for lease expirations, a minimum of 5-day grace period for late payments that are without fees or penalties. So yeah, they're imposing these things in your lease agreements, and there's some other requirements too. And I see in this article. So
yeah, and when we went through our refinance with Fannie Mae, obviously they, as a part of their underwriting on us, we had to provide them a copy of our lease, but we've got a great lease from an incredible attorney. His name's Tim Baldwin.
Oh, wow.
Property Manager Law Solutions provided that lease to us, and they didn't say a word about it. They said it was the greatest lease they ever found. So,
wow. Hey,
there's a plug for you, buddy.
Yeah, I gotta find the person who read it and have them on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah, seriously though, I sent them our lease, which obviously is your lease, and didn't hear a peep out of them. So
yeah.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you seeing? So what you're doing now, of course, you said you guys are always looking at deals and you're analyzing those, and you're probably talking to all kinds of investors across the country. But where is sort of the market that you guys are looking at outside of Pensacola, like Alabama, Tennessee? Are those areas of interest right now to you guys?
Yeah, right now we're kind of looking kind of further away from the Gulf Coast. We've got a pretty good portfolio now. By the end of this year, we'll be pushing 500 doors on the Gulf Coast. So just to kind of diversify, we're going to be creeping further north, still staying in the Southeast. But we're underwriting deals in Birmingham. Really like the Birmingham MSA. We're trying to get a deal done up there. South Carolina, we've looked at several deals up there. And so, yeah, we're just trying to venture a little, just to diversify our risk. We're trying to venture further north on the rental side, and then on the land development side, that's a lot more local type investment. So we're kind of sticking to the Panhandle right now on that.
So the hurricane area, of Florida with insurance and that kind of thing, is that one of the factors that you guys look at whenever you're considering where the asset is?
Oh yeah. Insurance kills a lot of deals on the Gulf Coast. Yeah, and that's always going to be a battle. It's we've been fortunate enough. So a lot of the assets we bought, we've kind of got into some umbrella insurance programs that have kind of helped our insurance costs, but it's usually one of the biggest line items in our performance. Most of the times that and property taxes. And so it is something that you have to look at hard, especially on the Gulf Coast. And not only that, it's not even what gets a lot of operators in trouble that are doing what we do is you can't just look at your insurance costs. Okay, you plug in we pay X per door. Well, if you ever have an actual claim, a lot of times the deductible on these policies are so massive, and you won't have enough cash in your reserves to even hit the deductible. And so we take it a step further, and when we're modeling, all right, we got to have $1 million sitting in the bank, if a claim's filed, otherwise we're having to do a capital call for investors. So you really got to keep your guard up on the coast to protect your investment dollars, because hurricanes are real and they do happen. And I've seen, just from seeing performance from other groups, I look at that reserve line item and I'll say, hey, that hurricane deductible, you're going to be replacing 70 of those roofs before you even can file a claim. Yeah. So that's something that we look hard at to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a vulnerable position.
So when you're talking to fellow investors or just people who are in this same kind of a space, and they're obviously you guys try to learn from each other and what to do, what not to do. I know you network a lot and you talk to people all across the country. What is sort of your go-to points that you try to make when you're talking about pitfalls or the what not to do? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. So on bill for rent, when you're looking at bill for rent specifically, and you're looking at leasing up a bill for rent asset, the biggest thing that, and this is just speaking from experience, is never get too aggressive on your modeling of the assumptions on lease up. Because you can make that spreadsheet spit out whatever you want. You can sit there and financial engineer the crap out of that thing and make it say whatever. But if you think, oh, I think we can get 10 leases a month, assume you're going to get 7. And then also, I see a lot of people chintz on their marketing budgets. My philosophy has been throw everything you've got at it right out of the gates. Do not chintz on your marketing, because you've got to generate leads for your leasing agents. Budget for concessions. I know concessions is a curse word sometimes, but it's better to get heads in beds versus no heads in beds. And so I always tell people, go heavy on, don't be afraid to throw concessions at it. Don't be afraid to spend the marketing dollars. Budget it on the front end, because you will end up spending it. And so I just encourage people to be aggressive. Be aggressive right out of the gates. Don't hesitate and say, well, let's just see what happens. Every day that passes, especially if you get a high interest rate bridge loan. I mean, one of our deals, we had our bridge loan. We did the math. It was like $5,000 a day in interest. So you think about $5,000 a day. If you don't come out of the gate swinging, every day that passes that you're not refinancing out of that bridge, you're just getting deeper and deeper in the hole.
Yeah.
So having that sense of urgency, not being afraid to spend the marketing dollars, work with third-party people that specialize in the marketing. Just don't chintz on it, because it will bite you.
Well, I sort of see this on my side from the legal side. I represent apartments and property management companies like yours across the state of Florida, and I can sort of tell when an apartment has become desperate to just put anybody in the unit without really without any notable screening process. They're really just trying to put anybody they can in the units. And of course, that many times the chances are the chances go up that you've got to evict those tenants. And so, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, even from the turnover and the eviction standpoint, in that if you don't spend enough money marketing to attract qualified tenants and you end up having to just take anybody you can get, that's not going to translate into a quality tenant. And you'll probably call me, say, hey, Tim, we got all these tenants who aren't paying rent, get them out. So I think you're right. And it certainly makes sense to put those dollars into the marketing strategy so you can get qualified tenants. Yeah.
And listen, I'm not sitting here casting stones in my glass house, because we've been that group that, I'm looking at the numbers and we're not hitting projections on lease up. And then I instruct the, property management team, like, look, we just got to get people in there. And you get in a sense of desperation, because there's so much money involved. You got to hit your lease up. But, ultimately at the end of the day, you end up paying for it. Many a times we've said, hey, Tim, we need your help. Got another eviction.
Well, it's a risky business, man.
Yeah, it's a chess match, man. It's just the nature of what we do. I mean, it's just, you kind of know going into it, you got to budget for some bad debt and budget for some evictions, because it's bound to happen. You just got to try to navigate as best you can and try to follow that tenant screening criteria as tight as possible.
So are you looking for any particular kind of investor? Like who are you trying to network with?
So right now we've got a pretty big network of LP investors. We've got about 200 investors in our kind of network right now. Average check sizes of around $200,000. And these are just people, high net worth individuals that want passive investment opportunities. And we've got a very long track record of managing investment dollars and being successful. And so, any listeners out there that have ever been curious about investing passively in real estate, love to talk to you. Tim can put my information in the show notes, but that's kind of our target right now is that $100,000 to $200,000 check size. These deals, they've got cash flow, they've got good tax benefits, and just we're just easy to do business with. And so that's kind of
Well, clearly I'm biased to you guys. I mean, we worked closely together, and I think you guys are great. The whole team is great that you've put together. And I know it's taken you a while, probably, I guess, to put all the team in place. And it's, of course, it's growing. So you've got to find new people and continue to build that growth model. So, but you guys have done a great job, and of course, it's been done through your leadership, Austin. And so I respect you and look up to you greatly. You want to leave just a word here with the audience before we wrap up the show?
Let me see. What words of wisdom could I leave the audience here? I don't have anything good, but I mean, Tim, you know my number one motto: rent is due.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see me run around the office screaming to everybody, rent is due. And I mean that figuratively and physically. Rent is due, and rent is due 365.
Yep.
So got to get after it.
The payment of rent covers a multitude of sins. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Exactly.
Well, cool, man. Well, listen, yeah. I greatly appreciate your time, Austin. I'll try to keep it at 30 minutes. I think we're at that 30-minute mark. So I'll wrap up the show, but man, I appreciate you coming on, and look forward to see what you're going to do in the future. And thanks for coming on the show today, Austin.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show today with me and Austin Tenpenny. I'll put some notes in the show for you to look up Austin and see what he's doing. You can contact me. Of course, if you're an apartment or a property manager or landlord, contact Property Management Law Solutions. We can help you with your legal needs, evictions, contracts, advice, and all that sort of thing. So thanks so much for listening, y'all. We'll see you on the next show.